Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
with another. We spoke last time about a great passage, just a single passage from the Aeneid, from the very first book of the Aeneid, and today we thought we'd move ahead to another, probably. Well, I don't know if it's more famous even than the last one.
It's sort of like Shakespeare.
You try to find one. Which is the most famous passage in Virgil? And you think of the tears of things, and we probably talk about that too. But, the other one that everyone quotes is much later. It comes from the end of book 6.
Book 6.
Yeah.
The descent into hell and the great prophecy of Aeneas' father. You remember, Aeneas' father had died early on in the journey from Troy, and now at the very center of the whole epic, Aeneas, by magic, descends into hell, and he meets his dead father, who prophesies, who tells him the reason why he must go to Italy, the reason why he must found Rome, and gives this famous passage. Right toward the end of book 6.
Yeah, it's this is really the grand finale of book 6, which is the most famous book in the Aeneid. Many people hardly read beyond book 6. It's such a great thing, such a great moment, and right at the end of that, just before Aeneas returns to the world, his father says the translation is well, I can read the whole little section there. He says, "Others, for so I can well believe, shall hammer forth more delicately a breathing likeness out of bronze, coax living faces from the marble, plead causes with more skill, plot with their gauge the movements in the sky, and tell the rising of the constellations. But you, Roman, must remember that you have to guide the nations by your authority, for this is to be your skill, to graft tradition onto peace, to show mercy to the conquered, and to wage war until the haughty are brought low."
We were saying last time about the Aeneid that it's pure poetry. It adheres in the very words themselves. That's certainly true. That's why we have these famous passages. Isn't it true? Weren't you quoting last time? Was it Frost who said poetry is what gets left out in the translation? I was thinking of trying to imitate Frost and come up with a quip, but it's pretty hard to do, and it got away from me before I formulated it. But something like this. Another way to put it would be to say that poetry is what's quotable, what's eminently quotable. The reason why there are so many famous passages in the Aeneid is that that's what poetry is. There's nothing you can do but quote it. There's nothing you can do but memorize it and quote it. I just was reminded again in English of Shakespeare. That is, he is not only is Shakespeare the most quoted author, but he's overwhelmingly the most quoted, isn't it? I've seen statistical accounts where you see Shakespeare is quoted 96%, and then the next nearest rival is John Milton, who is 32 or something like that, and then after that it goes down to 20, 10, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Even very great poets, let's say Wordsworth or Tennyson, would be down among the 5, 5, 5, 5, but Shakespeare is up in the 90s. He is the overwhelmingly best. And of course, I guess the winner of all time still turns out to be the Bible.
Yes.
Absolutely the most quoted. I think it's in something like that is in a famous place. It could be, my memory is very bad about this, but it could be at the beginning, at the preface to Bartlett's book of familiar quotations, or someplace like that.
Oh, yeah.
Where someone had asked the question, what are the most familiar quotes in all the world? And the Bible absolutely first and Shakespeare second for English-speaking people. But for Western civilization, if you go to all the languages of Europe, it would turn out to be Virgil. The Bible would still be first, but after that it would be Virgil.
Well, and that means that these are passages that have stuck in the memories of the human race.
They're not quoted from Bartlett. They're quoted from memory.
No, they're quoted from memory.
That's why they got into Bartlett.
yes, but it's true. That is, when you read Shakespeare as an English-speaking person, and if you've never read Shakespeare before, but if you read Shakespeare, on every page you come across a line that you know. You say, "Oh, well, I wonder if I haven't read this before." But maybe you never have read Shakespeare. Maybe you've never read a single play by Shakespeare, and yet on every page you'll find a line. Even in very obscure plays, you'll find a line. You'll say, "Well, I know that. I've heard that before." You have, because it's been quoted. It's been learned. It has simply stuck in the memory. And we've said before that poetry addresses the memory. It's addressed to the memory. People don't quote passages. Oh, you can do it, and some people do it. You can quote passages from Herodotus, but that's because Herodotus still has a lot of poetry in it.
Mm-hmm. There, I think you remember the story rather than quote it.
Yeah.
You retell it.
You retell it.
It's a different. It doesn't adhere in the words.
In the words, no.
The words.
People don't quote even Plato, who is very, very poetic. They remember what it is that he said.
Yeah.
They'll remember persons in the dialogues, and they'll remember what has been said. They'll remember stories like the myth of the cave or something of that sort, but they don't remember it word for word. Poetry does somehow inhere in the words themselves.
Maybe we ought to distinguish. I think we're using poetry in two different senses. I think maybe that's our problem. In the early part of these conversations, we spoke of poetry in the wide sense.
Yeah.
And here I think we're speaking of it in the strict sense. After all, Herodotus writes poetry in the wide sense. There is such a thing as poetic history. But then, let's put it this way, one of the 9 divisions of poetry is the lyric. And it may be what we're talking about here is more the lyrical effect. The Aeneid, it's true, is an imitation of Homer, and therefore it's normally classified as an epic. But, damn it, it isn't an epic. It's really a romance. That is an extended song, an extended lyric, or perhaps more like an opera where it has narrative passages, but then it stops and it has arias, great lyric passages. And these quotes that we're touching on, you think, have this lyric quality. Now, the word lyric just comes from the musical instrument lyre. The lyre was a sort of harp or guitar to which people sang. And we still use the word, we speak of popular songs having lyrics. We say Irving Berlin not only wrote the music, but he also wrote the lyrics. Or who was it? Rodgers, who wrote the music? I forget which is which. And Hammerstein wrote the lyrics, or however it went. And that's the proper use of the word. It means the words to be sung. And when we say poetry is what gets left out in the translation, we really mean lyric is what gets left out in the translation, because poetry in the wide sense can be eminently translated,
yes,
as Herodotus can be, and Homer can be, or much of Homer can be. Now, Homer also writes lyrics, and I guess that is left out. But there's so much else in Homer that it carries you along. But
Yes.
in the Aeneid, there isn't all that much else.
Yeah, we have said, and we would certainly stick to it. That is that that poetry in the wide sense inheres in the things, in the great
the
poems,
story,
in the story and the actions, but in a narrower sense, in a more restricted sense, the poetry does inhere in the words. This is a great argument. Mm-hmm. That is, many people, especially in modern times, have tended to reduce all poetry to words.
To the lyric.
To the lyric.
Yeah.
And
that was the criticism, for example, that began, I think, with Edgar Allan Poe, of all people.
Yes.
And it has been built up in the whole of the modernistic tradition that really everything else is a waste of time, that poetry is nothing but lyric. And that's always an error. That's always a mistake.
Well, and then you get Edgar. That's what's wrong with Edgar Allan Poe. Right. is that it's all words. It's just words. That's why he's so easy to make fun of.
Bells, bells, bells,
yes,
bells,
yes.
bells. The ringing of the tintinnabulation of the bells, and it's pretty good if you hear it aloud.
Yeah.
But by golly, it doesn't work very well on the print page.
And there's nothing much there. We say, well, there's no substance there. Almost no substance at all. It all is simply in the sound, and there have been a great many modern poets who are like that.
But on the other hand, we can turn around and say that there is such a thing as lyric, and it's something untranslatable but eminently memorable. That is, it sings. It has a kind of a music. And the music does something very mysterious to the memory. Teachers used to know that. I don't know whether they still do. With little children, if you can get them to sing a little tune, they can even remember essentially unmemorable things like timetables and 9 times 9 and ABCs and things like that. Put down 6 and carry 2, tap, tap, tap. Is that?
I don't know that one.
I forget what that's from even. I think it's from Alice in Wonderland, but I can't remember. Or something of Lewis Carroll. Not Alice, but some other thing. I think he wrote little mathematical jingles or something like that for children to learn. But I can remember in school we had these terrible teachers who made us do that. But it worked. We could remember that, I can still remember that 9 times 9 is 81, and I'm sure that I never would have remembered it any other way, but there was some kind of mnemonic device. Yeah. Well, we're wandering again, which is fine. Aeneas, after all, wanders through half of this book. But this passage is one of those great arias, one of those great lyric moments. And last time we had talked a lot about this, and the time before we talked about the prophetic quality of the Aeneid. Well, here they are, both in one passage. That is, this is a piece of lyric perfection, at the same time a piece of prophecy.
Well, all you need to do is pick up the book of Isaiah or Jeremiah and start reading it pretty much anywhere.
It's a
song.
It's a song.
It's exalted.
Isn't it that word, oh? We talked about that last time again. I think we touched on it, that there's something that may be oh without an H. We're not talking about uh-oh or oh. There are many ways to say it, but that round oh all by itself, oh, and sometimes it perhaps mellows a little bit to ah, and it gets even down to something softer than that. In the Salve Regina, there's a Latin word, eia, ergo advocata nostra. It's eja, and it's very soft, mellow, very loving, almost silent. Oh, eia, ergo advocata nostra. Illos tuos misericordes acarosanos converte. But that I suppose the Spanish still have words like that. At least I think that you hear them in song. We've lost them in English. We have oh and ah, and that's about it. English is kind of after all, a guttural, English was a dreadful language until the French sort of took it over and softened it a little bit. But that's that lyric quality. Well, I said all that, and O appears in here. O Roman.
Yeah, it's that vocative O.
Yeah.
That I remember once. I remember once reading. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Winston Churchill. As a little boy, he thought it was ridiculous to be able to address such a thing as a table with O, that it had a vocative. You could address the table.
You thought the Latin language was stupid.
Yeah, he was no good at it. He was a great writer of English prose, and he did, of course, learn a great deal of Latin, but he didn't like it.
But he was
no good at it.
Not a poet.
He wasn't. He was a poet. He thought that was just ridiculous. But of course, it isn't ridiculous in the Latin language. You can address anything in that lyrical way. You can bring in.
It becomes a person. You personify it.
Yeah.
But why not? Shakespeare makes fun of that. Doesn't Bottom use a lot of that kind of language in the little play? I ought to be able to even quote the lines, but he has a lot of that, "Oh, thou sky," or something like that. You know?
Oh, wall.
Wall, that's it.
It's the wall.
It's the wall, right. Oh, wall.
It's such a prosaic wall.
But there's a man playing the part of
Yes,
the wall.
yes, and he's a very foolish man.
So it is a person after all. Well, why not? We keep after all because of the authority, as it were, under which we're making these little tapes. We feel the presence of angels. Why not? After all, there's an angel there by that wall. Why not say, why not raise up to that vocative? That's the only proper mode of address to a person, especially to a person above you.
Yes.
Ave, of course, becomes that's the great address to the person above you. It isn't just hello, Mary. The angel doesn't say just hi, Mary, as some of the modern preachers sometimes say. But it's Ave. It's something, and I think O is used that way. O wall, O king, O Roman. It has about it not only the vocative, but the elevated in some way, or any way mysterious. Others shall beat out the breathing bronze to softer lines. This is the translation. This is by McHale, this translation.
A little more old-fashioned.
A little more old-fashioned. J.W. McHale goes back again. I think, before World War I. That generation before World War I. But what is it that Aeneas' father is saying to him here? Well, there are other nations, there will be even other great nations who will do great things that the Romans will not do. Others shall beat out the breathing bronze to softer lines. Well, he's talking, of course, about the genius of Babylon, the genius of Egypt, the genius of Greece especially Greece. The ability to work in plastic arts, not the arts of plastic. That word has changed its meaning too, but in sculpture. Others shall draw living lineaments from the marble. Now it's true that the Romans do have a famous sculpture, but it's not great art. Rome never produced Phidias. Rome produced good, serviceable portraits. The Roman statues are much more like photographs. The aesthetes don't go oh and ah so much about Roman art. In fact, most of it is copying Greek art.
Yes. Well, it doesn't really reach to the highest mystery of things. Mr. Senior used that word a moment ago. That lyric quality never emerges in Roman sculpture at all. They don't reach that.
There are marvelous pictures of, head survives anyway of Julius Caesar, or we have Cicero.
Busts of great men.
And they're magnificent portraits. But when you look at Greek art, the mystery is there. It's different.
The horses, everyone knows a Roman horse. When you see a picture or a picture, usually of a statue of a horse done by a Roman, you know it right away, and you are not likely to confuse it with a horse as it is represented on the frieze of the Parthenon.
Those Greek horses come from the gods.
Yeah, they are divine beings.
Yeah.
They're related. They're blood relatives of Pegasus.
They're expressive of something beyond themselves, whereas the Romans are naturalistic and marvelously
They're
done.
horses. They're
horses.
They're real horses, but there's nothing to them beyond that, which is a great thing to be.
And so Virgil here concedes it, or Anchises, that is Aeneas' father, Anchises is speaking here, and he concedes it. Others shall beat out the breathing bronze. And again, every one of these words in Virgil is so perfect. The breathing bronze. That is, the bronze that has spiritus, that has that breath, which is beyond what you expect in a piece of bronze. The living
it's a
lineage.
kind of paradox.
It is, right, exactly. Yeah.
Bronze can breathe, bronze doesn't breathe.
But the Greeks make it
it
do so. But he says others will do that. And he even says the cause shall be more eloquent on their lips. I'm not so sure he should have conceded that, because the Romans were great at oratory. In fact, I think most people would say that Cicero retired oratory, and that the Romans even surpassed the Greeks. But then, I don't know, maybe it's because we really don't know how great Demosthenes was. At least I don't know how great he was. We get some of the greatness of Greek oratory from Thucydides, and it certainly was a very great thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, Anchises is even willing to concede oratory, the cause, meaning the legal case, the case in law.
Yeah.
Their pencil shall portray the pathways of heaven and tell the stars in their arising. Well, they'll be greater at science. They'll be greater at astronomy. How does your translation go there?
Well, yours is a much different translation.
Very different.
Yeah, mine is plot with their gauge
Yeah,
movements in the sky.
I didn't bring along the...
Must be a controversy about that.
Well, they go pretty... They're trying to imitate the wonder of the poetry, and so they depart pretty far from the poetic. It's more poetic, but it may be further from the words. I don't know. I don't remember now. This is a passage I thought myself that I one time memorized, but I don't remember how it literally goes. But anyway, what he's talking about here is that others, and that's certainly true, others will be greater at science, and the Greeks were certainly greater at science. But then comes the middle of the passage. Others will do this, and others will do that, and others will do that. But be thy charge, O Roman. Be thy charge, O Roman, to rule the nations in thine empire. This shall be thine art, to ordain the law of peace, to be merciful to the conquered, and beat the haughty down. Now, this is the charge of the Roman. O Roman. I don't have the Latin in front of me, but I remember it does say regere. I mean, in the Latin, it does use the word regere, doesn't it? I'm pretty sure it does, meaning to rule.
Regere, yes. Imperio populos.
Yeah.
Romani.
Therefore, it means rule the peoples of the nations, O Roman. Yeah, that's literal then. So the Latin word there is regere populo. Regere, it takes the dative. Give rule to the people. Now that's the art, that's the charge of the Roman. Others will be greater at sculpture, and others will be greater at oratory, and others will be greater at science. But the Roman will be the greatest at this one thing. Regere populi, rule the people. And I wrote down the Latin here, haec tibi sunt artes. These shall be thy arts. Pacisque imponere morum. To impose the mores of peace. That would be a literal translation. And the translators don't like to keep it too close because they want to try to recapture in English the beauty and the perfection of the Latin. But there it is. To impose they translate that here, the law of peace. But mores
is more. They translate it here as tradition,
that's better.
which is
That's
better.
better.
Tradition is better. In fact, this translation that I have, which is by Jackson Knight, says to graft tradition onto peace. The word is imponere, and if you translate it literally, it means to impose morum onto.
To place
peace.
into, right?
Yeah, but it's he's trying to indicate that when he says graft tradition onto peace, that is to give the idea that of course tradition is already there, present. It isn't something that you make up. If you say impose it on, it's the idea. You have the idea that you just kind of make up the tradition and place it onto peace, which is not the right idea.
But
it's a very hard passage to translate.
It's very hard. Well, you can't translate.
The other translation I have, it gives you a completely different idea. This guy says, and this is the Globe translation, which he tries to always to be literal. He says, to crown peace with law.
Yeah.
Now that's
pretty far off.
That's pretty far away from that. But it's very, very difficult to get the sense.
What we started out by saying that one of the reasons why I was fooling around with the Latin, which we didn't try to do with the Greek, it's because really that's what Virgil does. It inheres in the very words. Pacisque imponere morum. The word mores is used by modern anthropologists to describe something like this. That is, what do we mean by the mores of the people? The customs, the tradition,
habits,
the way they do things. The word moral derives from it, but it's not the same thing. That is, morals are not the same thing as mores. Moral has to do with good and evil act, whereas mores has to do with manners as well as morals. It includes everything. And what Anchises is saying here is that the arts of the Roman, the arts will be the art. Well, we sometimes say it of the French today. The French aren't very great as the English are at poetry, and they're not very great as the Germans are at music, and they're not very great as the Italians are at, well, opera, which is a kind of music. But by golly, the French know the art of life, the art of living. Yeah. I think that's true. They do.
Yes.
Well, Virgil isn't saying here that the Romans know the art of living. What he's saying is they know the arts of peace. They know how to keep the peace. And that word imponere is very, very important. It's not, it's not related etymologically, but it's a good word to associate with imperium. That is, with the command of peace. There may be some people today who would listen to what we were saying here out of context and misunderstand it. Surely, Virgil here isn't talking about peace in the sense of green peace, peace in the sense of peace, 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 everybody loves peace, why don't we just throw down our arms and we'll all have peace. Not at all. It is imposed. The word imponere is a very, very important thing. Peace is something that can only be commanded. There has to be an empire that imposes the rule of peace. I suppose that's why these other two translators did use law, even though literally that's not true. They were a little afraid, perhaps, of the idea getting away.
Well, it's the reason that's such a difficult passage to translate is it has in it the idea of combining the morem with peace.
Whereas we separate.
You unite those two things, and that's the secret of the Roman ability.
I mean, the peacenik today thinks that the way to do it is to scrap tradition, to throw tradition away, and somehow we'll all have peace. That's as far from Virgil as you can get. It's only through this reluctant war that the peace can be achieved. But that's the meaning of this whole passage. That is,
see, there is a way of life which is already present. Which, in a way, I think I go back to that phrase about coaxing the living faces from the marble.
Mm-hmm.
That is, that the faces are already there in the marble,
mm-hmm.
And that what the artist does is to draw them out of the marble. He frees them from their surrounding marble, and that the mores, or the tradition, is something that is already there in the people, but that it has to be united to peace. It's a natural. I'm using another metaphor. He uses the metaphor of grafting, and I'm using the metaphor of wedding these two things in order to achieve peace.
We're going over this passage. We've got three experts here. Mikhail, who goes back to the older generation of the post-Victorian or Edwardian world. Jackson Knight, who is one of the most famous of the modern translation of the generation of T.S. Eliot. And then the Loeb Library, who is the scholar and who has the authority of
Fairclough,
a professor of a man who's dedicated his whole life. He's a professor of Latin somewhere or other. So you have the scholar and two poets here. One a little bit older and the other one modern, but three eminent experts, all differing. And we're talking over and over and over again about three words here, really. Well, we put the book down and we say, that's Virgil. That's exactly what he does. And that's what lyric poetry does. There are only two things you can do with a lyric poem. You can sing it, or you can put the book down and then talk about it forever. That is, what does it mean? And you never can figure out what it means. You quarrel about what it means. Then you pick it up and you sing it, and the meaning all comes together again. The lyric of all of the kinds of poetry that there are, there's the dramatic and the epic and the historical, and the rhetorical, I suppose, to some extent. Well, rhetoric is not in the order of poetry, but is a kind of talky poetry. There are many different kinds of poetry, but of all the different kinds, the lyric is the most perfect, the most precise, and untranslatable. And that's why you get these long conversations about what it means. What it means is exactly what it says. There's nothing wrong with that. I know some people, especially people with literal minds, get very annoyed with that. And I don't mean to disparage people with literal minds. They do the work of the world. But they get annoyed with Virgil. They get annoyed with lyric poetry. They say, the heck with it. I mean, what's it all about?
Yeah, they say, why doesn't he just say in plain language what he means? And
Exactly.
Virgil would say, well, I am saying and it is plain language, but what I mean is not something that is susceptible to being put down in a kind of formula or in a language that is scientific. I think people with literal minds are groping towards some kind of scientific language where every word means one thing and only one thing. And that is the ideal of science. You say, well, what we want to do is find a word that describes this phenomenon and describes nothing else. It's very close to the language of mathematics, as a matter of fact. It never works quite. Science has never succeeded in doing that. That's why you get a technical jargon in science so often. They're trying to find exactitude in language. And poets don't have that kind of exactitude at all. Words have a great wealth of meaning. Every word in a poem has a great range of meaning. And there are lots of possibilities there. They give rise, we say, one of the things that poetry does is give rise to reflection, to contemplation of the nature of things. It doesn't nail it down in some definition or some formula, as we do attempt to do when we're talking more scientifically or more philosophically.
Or that's absolutely right. And you might add to that another form of impatience comes from rhetoric. That is, comes from the area of politics, where people get impatient because the poet doesn't tell you what to do. Well, if we do this, we'll be here all night. That's the rhetorician always says, we have to solve this problem. We have to do something. We have an agenda. And the poet says, "Oh,
agenda,"
and you're off again into reflection. In a perfect world, we would all follow Aristotle, and we would have the four kinds of knowledge present at all times. We would have poets and rhetoricians and dialecticians, that is, the scientists, and then we would have philosophers. But we don't live in a perfect world, and Virgil is almost a pure poet. That is, he has very little of anything else in it. There's very little, strange to say, when you come to think of it, there's very little of the rhetorician. There aren't any speeches in Virgil the way there are even in Homer.
Yeah, even Homer does have some long speeches.
Yeah. And they're very good, and they would stand up against the speeches that you find in Thucydides.
Yeah, well, especially in the Iliad, those speeches where Phoenix comes to Achilles and attempts to persuade him to return to the battle.
Those are arguments.
Magnificent arguments that are there in the midst of the poem, and they're still poetry because, after all, Phoenix is a man.
A character in the poem.
A character in the
But
poem.
I never thought of that before. But from one end of the Aeneid to the other, I can't think of any splendid argument like that. He does it, but they're not all that good.
Yeah, no, they're not. Yeah, and they're not characteristic of him. This really doesn't constitute. Well, obviously, this is a piece of prophecy. It doesn't. There are admonitions that come to my mind.
But it's
later
not
on.
rhetoric; it's poetry.
Yes.
Whereas with even with Homer, and certainly with Thucydides, and to some extent with Herodotus, you get these great oratorical displays. But here you tend to go back always into the reflective, and the rhetorical man gets impatient with that. He says, "Oh, you're always wringing your hands, and you're always saying, oh, and you're talking in mysteries. What do you mean by this?"
What does it mean to graft tradition onto peace?
Yeah.
Spell that out. Give me a blueprint of how to do that. Well, he does go. He does go on to expatiate on that a little bit. He says,
the last line, yeah.
He says to show mercy to the conquered and to wage war until the haughty are brought low. Those are the words that most people really do remember.
He reduces it to 4 words in Latin, connected by an et.
Yeah.
And this, I mean, here you have to say Virgil really is a genius. This is the pure poetry where the whole thing is summed up in a line. Parcere subjectis et de bellare superbus. Well, that's just marvelous. And it comes to that silence. That is, didn't we talk last time about that dactylic dump-da-da-dump-dump? De bellare superbus. It ends with a kind of silence. Parcere, now that means to spare. Catholics always remember that because parce domine occurs in so many prayers, especially around during Holy Week. Spare us, O Lord. It appears, of course, in litanies. Parcere subjectis. Spare the subject, the ones who have been subjected. How does he put it here? Be merciful to the conquered. Well, yeah.
The subjectos are, that means those who are cast down, literally.
Yeah.
Sub, of course, just means...
The conquered is only one kind.
Yeah.
Can be the lowly, that is anybody who is subject to anyone else. Conquered is, of course, perhaps the first meaning of it, but slaves and poor people, widows and orphans. I mean, there are many people who have been subjected.
Humble is another word. Another of my translators here.
That's
says,
closer to the Christian.
The humbled, he says, to spare the humbled. And that does contain in it the idea of being brought low. The literal idea of this is to be brought low. You see, there's an exact parallel between the subjectis and the superbos. The super means above, and sub means below. And there's an exact contrast, I should say.
Right, it's so well composed,
antithesis.
Isn't it? Yeah, I mean, every syllable is balanced in this line. You wonder how he did that. I mean, people, professional poets love Virgil. They'll stare at a line like that for hours and try to imitate it because it is done with such art. Sub and super are perfectly contrasted, and parcere and de bellare. Spare the one, and bellare, it means to war them down, to fight them down, as opposed to the opposite of set them free. You could translate it, liberate the one and beat down the other.
Beat down, yes.
Beat down the other.
As if you have the idea that you're sort of elevating, you raise up those who are lowly, and you batter down.
When you say that, you're into the Magnificat, which is almost word for word, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is again, Christians are always in awe when they read these pagan lines. They say, haven't I heard that somewhere before? You were speaking about reading Shakespeare. Haven't I heard that? Well, yes, you have, but it's in the Magnificat, and it's also all over the place in the Old Testament, in the Psalms, in various songs from the Old Testament as well. But here it is in a pagan altar. This is your art, O Roman, we would almost translate it in so many ways, to liberate the enslaved, to set free people who have been enslaved, to spare those who have been conquered, to raise up the humble, to help the sick, to help the widow, the orphan, those in need, the poor.
Or the idea that the last shall be first.
This is
blessed are the poor in spirit.
Right.
That kind of
he
thing.
says this is the art of the Roman. This is what he was chosen by the gods to do. And then, on the other hand, It's not, as I say, going to happen in the hippie way, which is so popular nowadays. It's not going to happen by Greenpeace. It's not going to happen by just throwing away all our weapons. In order for that to happen, you have to have an army which will de bellare superbos. The Romans are a warlike people, and I guess the Romans are as famous for their legions as they are for their law. These are the two things that Rome is famous for, and the figure, the person of Julius Caesar, of course, rises up here. He's the one who, above all, incarnated these two ideas.
Speaking in military terms, in order to bring about peace,